estuarine settlements, what am I talking about? What am I referring to? So we have a very large coastline as a country, Nigeria. And because the coastline is so large, we have a lot of estuarine ecosystems. We're talking about mangrove forests, mud flats, and other open water bodies where fresh water and salt water meet, where rivers open into the ocean, and where cities, get some relief from the ocean floods because there's something in between. So the Nigerian coastline all the way from the east to the west, we have a lot of estuarine settlements. Now, what's the connection between the estuarine settlements and climate change? Why is it important? Why is it something we want to be talking about? And why is it something we think that we need to take action for? Now, coming back to Rivers State, a lot of our local communities, by reason of their terrain, are low-lying, right? And one of the impacts of climate change is flood. We have a lot of our communities that are low-lying, and flood has always been with us as far as mankind exists. Low-lying communities have been vulnerable, have been susceptible to flooding, but climate change is making it worse. Global warming, glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising. Communities that ordinarily would have coped with rainy season floods and all of that are finding it very difficult to continue to cope with that. And so climate change is making it very difficult for us to remain the way we have always been. And it's not sufficient to do nothing about it. Something needs to be done about it, and soon. Now, again, my comfort zone is in the area of property. As a professor of land management and valuation, my interest is in the connection between how we use land, abuse land, misuse land, underuse land, and what that does to property value. In the same way, land misuse, abuse can also aggravate climate change. We can also contribute to those things that are responsible for global warming if we do not have the right policies in place to check them. So in Nigeria, for instance, and in all of mankind, you don't understand why people love to live along the coasts. Big cities around the world, most of them are in areas that are around the coastline. They want to take advantage of harbors. They want to take advantage of the scenery. They want to take out so many things. So there's a lot happening in this environment. But one thing that continues to happen is the insatiable request for property. Property investment. We have the Eco-Atlantic coming up. People want to go and live inside the ocean. They want to live as close to water as possible. Fine. But the estuarine ecosystems continue to suffer. And as long as they continue to suffer, the climate change impacts continue to be expanded and, becomes more aggravating. So in terms of flooding, what's the connection? There were jokes a few weeks back. PortHarcourt floods, it was on Twitter, it was everywhere. But sometimes we're forgetting that it didn't always flood like this. We can see what is happening, and we're assuming that they're totally disconnected with global warming. No, it's connected. So what's happening is you have instances of prime properties being developed within areas that are susceptible to flooding. And what is happening is that as the global warming continues, the ocean levels and sea levels are rising. The more we build closer to the rivers and to coastlines, the higher the risk of losing our investments in the not-too-distant future. Now, in 2012, Nigeria flooded. We had a very bad flood in this country. And at the end of that flooding, over 1.3 million properties were destroyed. And out of 1.3 million properties destroyed, over 240,000 of those properties were in River State. That is what's happening with climate change. It's not far, it's right here with us. Now, what must we do? So the pandemic is here, COVID is here, we're adapting. We're beginning to learn how to keep our face masks on. We're beginning to learn how to make them creative, to match our clothes for the ladies. What is happening with climate change? Why are we not adapting? Why are we not taking it serious enough to adapt? And so climate change adaptation is something that has to happen, particularly in the built environment, in the construction industry, where we need to take deliberate steps and be intentional about not adding to the narrative. A World Bank research shows that the mangroves, so we have the mangroves everywhere, right? The mangrove forests are natural infrastructure that can protect low-lying settlements from the impact of climate change. One of the things the mangroves can do is to break the velocity and the speed with which storm surges come into land. It slows it down and reduces its power to destroy. Another thing it can also do is to slow down the speed with which flooding going out of the city gets into water bodies. It also slows it down and creates a situation where we do not have a lot of erosion, where we have erosion eroding our banks. So a lot needs to happen in terms of dealing with climate change. That natural infrastructure, the mangroves, for those of us who are from riverine communities and estuarine communities in River State, we know how the mangroves are. We know how we drive through them. You know, for those who go on boat rides to places like Bonny and all of that, you see mangroves on either side, you know, on your journey. But we're depleting the mangroves. We're sand filling. We're building right there because everyone wants to get closer and closer and closer to the seafront. And so we're destroying what is a natural protection against climate change. So what action must we take? We need to stop the depletion of the mangroves. Very important. For two reasons. One, so it can retain its protective function. And two, so we can have more carbon sinks. The more vegetation you have, the larger the carbon sink we have. The earlier speakers had spoken about that, so I'm not going into that. So I just want to share some of the action we have taken and I have been involved in over the last 10, 12 years. So in 2009, the River State University of Science and Technology back then, now the River State University, embarked on what we call a syllabus greening campaign. This was in collaboration with the United Nations Environment Program, the Environmental Education and Training Unit, embarked on mainstreaming climate change into university curricula, such that anybody who went through a university campus, by the time you graduated, you would understand climate change just the way you understand any basic thing as 1, 2, 3. What the whole concept was or is to make climate change not appear like something that is so remote, something that is external to us. Is to make climate change real, so it's part of our everyday living, and in everything we do and all the decisions we have to take, we factor in climate change. Will this contribute to climate change? Will this worsen the situation? Or will this help to mitigate that? And so I participated and literally facilitated that workshop in 2009. And the outcome of that workshop was a commitment by university faculties to green their syllabus. And so different faculties and different departments went ahead to do that. And in my department, the Department of Estate Management, what we did was to create a specialist MSc option called Land Management and Sustainable Development. The whole idea was to begin to teach future policymakers and decision makers that climate change is part of your everyday decision making, particularly within the context of property investment. Where you build. For instance, we have moved from so many different housing projects. Housing for All by the year 2000, that came and went, and then we just keep having housing projects. But what do the housing projects do? They lead to deforestation, right? You clear virgin land because you need to build estates to accommodate people. People need homes. So the government has a responsibility to provide that. So that happens. But we reduce the size of the carbon sink. The more trees we fell for legitimate requirements in terms of investment, the more we contribute our little quota to worsening climate change. And so what we wanted to do was to achieve a crop of professionals who would understand that it's not enough to just provide accommodation, but it's also important that you are mitigating the climate change contributions you're making. And so going, down many years from when that project started in 2014 till now, we have accomplished quite a bit in terms of mainstreaming climate change. We have been able to produce a new crop of thinkers, a niche of what I call the Land Management and Valuation Crusaders. And what these crusaders are doing in their research, in their academic publications, is to begin to steer thinking of society towards the fact that climate change is with us. The trajectory has already been set in motion. The ice caps that have melted have melted. They're not freezing up again. So that trajectory, like a viral infection, will run its course. And one of the things that will happen is that our low-lying communities, our estuarine settlements, will continue to bear the brunt of climate change. They will remain vulnerable for a long time to come, and we must find a way to improve their coping capacity. We must find a way to make them resilient. It's already happening, and so we need some intervention. So some of the research that my colleagues and maybe my former students have done, I'll just share a few of them. In Bayelsa State, we have worked on a project that looks at increasing flood resilience through design, changing architectural designs such that if you build in an area that is prone to flooding and also increased intensity in the frequency of flooding as a result of climate change, you can design around it, right? And so calling on the young architects, the young creative artists coming up to say, hang on, climate change is here, fine, there's no argument. But as engineers, as designers, we will design around climate change and ensure that we can remain resilient. We've also looked at the wetlands. Our wetlands are huge resources, biodiversity resources. We can't keep sand-filling our wetlands. We need the wetlands. We need the mangrove. We need to retain the barrier between salt water and fresh water. The more you destroy that, the more you begin to have saltwater intrusion into our drinking wells. So as a land management professional, my interest is in how we can, through policy, regulation, and land management tools, bring in either punitive measures or taxation or other methods that prevent the continued aggravation of climate change impacts. We've also looked at the introduction of land management tools in sustainability and environmental protection. We're looking at such issues. How can we come up with new policies, new regulation? How can we mitigate the physical vulnerabilities? Some communities are just doomed to be dealt with as far as climate change is concerned because of where they are. They are low-lying. It was nothing they did. It was nothing their forefathers did. That's just where the settlements are, but climate change is here. We need to enhance their coping capacity. We need to build resilience. So in conclusion, there's a call to further action. Who are the key players who continue to erode our mangrove forests, our rich biodiversity, our natural infrastructure against storm surges, our natural infrastructure against flood. The property sector, that's my sector, right? So there's some controversy. But that sector is also funded. So what if we had land management instruments, for instance, that say, for every 1 square meter of mangrove you destroy to put up a new housing estate, we expect you to plant 10 before you get approval from the government to build. Those are ways of giving back. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 15 talks about land degradation neutrality, neutralizing, land degradation. You're destroying somewhere, like one of the videos we watched, put it back somewhere else. But put 10 times back what you're going to destroy before you get any permission to destroy that. So we're hoping that mangrove destruction can reduce as much as possible. I totally agree that Africa needs to develop, Nigeria needs to develop, but we have an opportunity to develop in a more sustainable manner than the countries that developed before us. And in doing so, we can change the narrative. We can ensure that we're contributing to expanding the carbon sink by regrowing the mangroves, and we can also ensure that we are contributing to shoreline protection, preserving our local communities in low terrain should the worst come. So I just hope that, we would, going forward, understand that you and I have a role to play in terms of where we choose to build, how we choose to build, what designs we choose to go for in terms of our joint effort at dealing with climate change decisively once and for all. Thank you very much.